The snow had been falling since noon, and by 9 it had become something else entirely. Not weather anymore. A presence. A wall of white silence pressing down on the mountain town of Harlan Creek, Montana, filling the ditches along Route 9, swallowing the yellow lines on the road, erasing everything soft and forgiving about the landscape until only the hard things remained. The pines, the rocks, the cold, and the neon sign above the Steel Reaper clubhouse buzzing red and amber against the dark, like something alive, like something that had decided a long time ago that it was not going to go out no matter what the weather said. Inside the clubhouse was warm in the way that places get warm when they have absorbed years of human heat. Coffee and motor oil, and the particular smell of leather that had been rained on and dried and rained on again more times than anyone had thought to count. The overhead lights burned low. A ceiling fan turned slowly above the bar, despite the cold outside, an old habit nobody had gotten around to breaking. Four men sat at the far table with cards face down, not playing anymore, just sitting in the comfortable silence of people who had long ago stopped needing to fill quiet with noise. Two others stood near the bar, not drinking, just standing the way men stand when they are thinking about something they would rather not be thinking about. Maddox Callahan sat alone at the end of the bar with a mug of black coffee going cold in front of him. He was 43 years old and he looked it. Not old, used, the way a good tool looks when it has been put to hard work for a long time and maintained but not spared. There was a scar that ran from his left jawline to just below his ear, thin and pale, against the weathered skin. The kind of scar that did not invite questions because the people who might ask had learned over time that the answer was not coming. His hair was dark with threads of gray at the temples, and he wore it close cropped the way he had worn it in the army, a habit that had outlasted everything else from that chapter of his life. His jacket hung on the stool beside him. Beneath it he wore a flannel shirt rolled to the elbows, and on his right forearm there was a tattoo that the men in the club had seen 1,000 times but never asked about directly. A compass rose with the needle snapped clean at the base, pointing nowhere. He had gotten it 8 years ago during a winter that was worse than this one, in a town he had never gone back to for reasons he kept in a room inside himself with the door shut. He was staring at nothing. He did that sometimes. The other Reapers had learned to leave it alone. Outside, the wind found the building in gusts that made the walls breathe. The fire in the wood stove at the back of the room hissed when a draft reached it. Someone at the card table said something low. Someone else made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was close enough. Maddox raised the coffee mug, registered that it was cold, set it back down. That was when the door opened. Not knocked, not rattled. Opened with the full weight of a person who had been walking a very long time, leaning into it, pushing through it, spending the last of something that had almost completely run out. The cold came in first, a blade of it sharp enough to turn every head in the room. Then the snow swirling around the frame, catching the low light as it entered. And then the boy. He was small for his age, which Maddox would later learn was 12. He looked younger. The cold had tightened his face, drawn everything in toward the center, the way extreme weather compresses whatever it touches. He was wearing a jacket at least 2 sizes too large, dark navy broken zipper held together by the tension of his arms pressing against his own chest. Beneath it, a gray sweatshirt washed so many times the letters printed on it had faded to ghost shapes that no longer spelled anything. His jeans were soaked from the knee down. His shoes were canvas low, completely wrong for a Montana blizzard, and they left wet, dark prints on the wood floor with each step he took inside. His hair was dark and plastered flat against his forehead in chunks. His arms were locked together at the front, crossed over something wrapped in a blanket that had once been pale yellow and was now gray with road dirt and damp. One small arm was visible where the blanket had slipped, hanging loose, thin and still. A child's arm. A little girl's arm. The boy stood in the doorway with the storm at his back and looked at the room. He took it in with the unhurried thoroughness of someone performing a threat assessment. The leather, the size of the men, the particular quality of stillness that filled rooms like this one, the stillness of people who were comfortable with silence, because they had been through things that made ordinary noise seem small. He looked at all of it, and something moved across his face that was not fear, or was not only fear. It was the expression of a person who had already considered every other option available to them and had crossed each one off the list, and who was now standing at the last door and had decided that whatever was behind it was still better than what was behind them. His lip was split. There was a bruise high on his left cheekbone, dark and deep, the color of something that had been hit hard several days ago and had settled in fully. The kind of bruise that did not come from a fall. The room had gone completely still. Cards were face down. The men at the bar had turned. Maddox had not moved from his stool, but his eyes were fully on the boy, with a quality of attention that the other Reapers recognized. The shift in the room's center of gravity. The thing that happened when Maddox stopped doing whatever he was doing and started watching something instead. The boy's throat moved. He looked directly at Maddox, not because he knew who Maddox was, because the body knows sometimes without being told which person in a room is the one that matters. Please don't send us back. 5 words. Quiet enough that they should not have carried across a room that size with a fire going and the wind outside doing what it was doing. And yet every man in the room heard them. Not with their ears, with something older and lower somewhere in the chest, somewhere that does not have a name, but responds to certain things, whether you want it to or not. The fire hissed. Nobody spoke. Maddox set his coffee mug down on the bar. He stood up from the stool with the deliberate, unhurried care of a man who understands that sudden movements can shatter fragile things. He was 6'2" and broad through the shoulders, and he knew exactly how he looked. Knew what a room full of men like him looked like to a child standing alone in the doorway with the storm behind them. He kept his hands visible. He kept his voice level. "You're not going anywhere right now," he said. "Come inside and close the door." The girl's name was Lily. She was 6 years old and she was running a fever. Doc Halsey determined this within 4 minutes of the children's arrival, 3 of which he spent simply getting close enough to make an assessment without causing the boy to step backward. Doc was 51, the oldest full-patch Reaper, and he had spent 8 years as a combat medic with the 82nd Airborne before 2 injuries and a discharge that was not entirely his choice had redirected his life in ways he had not planned and had eventually made a kind of peace with. His hands were steady. They were always steady, not as a performance, as a fact of his biology, something that had been burned into his nervous system in places where an unsteady hand meant someone died. He crouched in front of the boy, slowly making himself smaller, making his approach visible and unhurried. "She's sick before tonight?" he asked. The boy, who had given his name in a single flat syllable when Maddox asked like a piece of identifying information being submitted to an official record, looked at Doc with the same calculating expression he had used on the room, measuring, deciding. "She's been coughing for a week," Ethan said. "She gets cold easy." "Has she eaten today?" A pause long enough to mean something. "No." "Have you—" The pause this time was longer. Ethan's jaw tightened in a way that was not a 12-year-old's jaw. "I'm fine." Doc did not push it. He reached out and pressed the back of his fingers to Lily's forehead, then her neck. She stirred faintly, made a small sound that was not quite a word, did not wake. Her breathing was shallow but even. The fever was real but not critical. Not yet. He stood and looked at Maddox over the boy's head. The look said she needs warmth and food and rest. It also said, look at his face. Look at his arms. Maddox had already been looking. The bruise on Ethan's cheek was recent, 24 hours old at most, still swollen at the center. There was another mark on his forearm where the oversized jacket had shifted when he reached out to adjust Lily's blanket. A line of faded yellow-green bruising in a pattern that was not consistent with a door frame or a fall or any of the explanations that people who did not want to see something reach for. There was a thin cut above his right eyebrow, 4 or 5 days old, the kind that came from a ring or a belt buckle rather than a fist. Boone Clearwater, who was sitting nearest the door and had not moved since the children came in, said quietly, "Those are old." "Yeah," Maddox said. "They are." Ethan heard them. He did not react the way a child caught in a lie would react. No defensiveness, no scrambling to explain. He just looked at the floor for a moment, then back up. The expression on his face was not the expression of someone discovered. It was the expression of someone seen. And those were not the same thing. A child discovered in something expected to be punished for it. A child who had been seen for the first time after a long time of not being seen did not know what to do with the fact of it yet. Ethan looked like the second kind, like someone who had stopped expecting to be seen so long ago that being seen now did not fully compute, and he was still working through what it meant. "Sit down," Maddox told him. "Both of you. We're going to get you something hot." Colt Beaumont was in the kitchen before anyone asked him to be. He was 37, built in the way that serious physical work builds a man over time, and covered from wrist to collarbone in ink that told the story of a life that had not been gentle. He cooked because he had grown up watching the women in his family cook, and because somewhere along the way he had understood that feeding people was the most direct form of care available in situations where care was the right thing, but words were not enough. He heated broth. He shredded chicken from something in the back of the refrigerator. He cut bread from a loaf that was mostly still good. He worked without being instructed, without commentary, without needing anyone to notice. Lily woke when the smell reached her. She woke the way sick children wake, rising slowly through layers of sleep, her face creased and her eyes unfocused, and then gradually registering the world. Not her room, not her bed, surrounded by large, strange men. Her face began to move toward fear. Ethan was beside her before it fully arrived. Hey, Lil, look at me, just me. Just, she looked at him. Something in her face settled. Not calm exactly, but the version of calm that a child builds when she has learned to use one specific person as her reference point for whether the world is safe. She looked at her brother, and the fear did not complete itself. Maddox watched from across the room and felt something move in his chest that he did not examine closely. He had seen that dynamic before. Not in foster homes, in other places with sand underfoot and the constant low percussion of things that could kill you, where young soldiers who had no business being as far from home as they were learned to keep their eyes on the one person in their unit who reminded them they were still themselves, still alive, still worth something. Colt set the bowl on the coffee table. He stepped back and then, without anyone suggesting it, crouched down so that his eyes were at the same level as Lily's. Not strategy, just instinct. The instinct of a large man who had spent enough time around frightened things to know that size is the first problem to solve. "Hey," he said, "you like chicken soup?" Lily looked at him. She took in his size, the ink climbing his forearms, the scar above his lip. Then she looked at the bowl, then back at him. "With crackers," she said. Colt laughed. A real laugh startled out of him, and it changed his face completely. Opened it up, took years off it. He looked over at Reese Daly, the youngest Reaper at 26, who was hovering near the kitchen doorway because he did not yet know what else to do with himself. "We got crackers." Reese disappeared and came back in 30 seconds with a sleeve of saltines. Lily ate half the bowl before she fell back asleep. Ethan ate the other half standing up, his back mostly turned to the room, eating quickly and without looking at the food the way a person eats when experience has taught them that meals can be interrupted or taken away, and the only safe approach is to finish before that happens. Nobody commented on it. Nobody looked away from what they were doing in a way that would make him feel watched. Maddox waited 20 minutes. Then he pulled a chair close to where Ethan was sitting and sat down facing him, elbows on his knees, in the position of a man with nowhere more important to be and nothing more pressing to do than be right here. "You don't have to tell me anything," Maddox said. Ethan looked at him. "But I need to know enough to help you. You understand the difference." A long pause. Outside, the storm had found a new gear. A sustained howl that was not a gust, but a constant, the kind of wind that had decided to stay for a while. The windows rattled in their frames. "They're going to come looking," Ethan said. "Who?" "The Whitmores." He said the name with no inflection, no coloring of any kind. A fact being stated. Our foster family. He said those two words the way you would say a word in a language you did not speak phonetically without meaning attached. When they wake up and we're not there, they'll call. DCS will send someone. How long before that? Ethan looked at the window, calculating. 7 hours, maybe 8. Maddox nodded slowly. Okay, what happens when they come? Something happened in Ethan's face. A tightening, a compression of features so small and so controlled that it was almost invisible, the involuntary brace of a body that had learned to prepare for impact. They take us back, he said. That's what always happens. They take us back and they say they're sorry, and they put us in a room and they wait for everyone to forget. He paused. And then it starts again. How long has it been starting again? The question sat between them. The fire in the wood stove popped softly. Lily's breathing was visible in the slight rise and fall of the blanket someone had tucked more securely around her while she slept. 2 years, Ethan said, since we got placed with them. 2 years and 3 months. Maddox held very still. And before you came here tonight, he said, where did you go first? It was the question that mattered. Not why are you here? That was clear enough. But the map of closed doors that had led to this one. That was what Maddox needed to understand. Ethan looked at him for a long time. Then he started talking. 11 months ago, he had gone to a school counselor, a woman named Mrs. Aldridge, 5th grade. She had a poster in her office about safe adults. She had kind eyes. She had listened to everything he said, written things down, used the language he had learned from the internet. She had told him she was required to report it. He had waited 3 weeks for something to change. Nothing changed. He had gone back. Mrs. Aldridge had looked at him with an expression he had not had a word for at the time, but could name now. It was the expression of someone who had done the thing they were supposed to do and found a wall behind it and had quietly decided to stop pushing. She told him the social worker had investigated and found no concerns. He did not go back a third time. 8 months ago, the woman across the street, a neighbor named Mrs. Petrosky, who kept a dog that barked at everything, had seen Lily on the porch in January without a coat. She had called the police. A patrol car came. A uniformed officer knocked on the Whitmore's door, was led inside, spent 20 minutes in a warm house with food in the refrigerator, and a man who smiled the right way and said all the right things. The officer left. I watched from the upstairs window, Ethan said. I saw the officer shake Dale Whitmore's hand when he left. Maddox said nothing. Dale Whitmore has been coaching the high school baseball team for 19 years, Ethan said. He knows everyone. The sentence was delivered without emphasis. No accusation in it, no performance of outrage, just facts arranged in a particular order that described a specific reality that a 12-year-old had been made to understand through direct experience. The reality that certain men in certain towns were protected not by law, but by familiarity. By the accumulated goodwill of decades of Saturday games and handshakes and plaques on walls. 4 months ago, Ethan had found a number online, a child welfare advocacy hotline out of Missoula. He had called from a borrowed phone at the school library because his own phone had been taken, which Dale Whitmore called losing privileges, and which happened whenever Ethan did something that Whitmore decided required punishment. He spoke to a woman who listened for 40 minutes and told him she was filing a formal complaint with the state oversight office and that he had done exactly the right thing and that she would follow up. She gave him a case number. He had written it on the inside of his left forearm in pen. He pulled up his sleeve now and showed Maddox. A string of numbers in small, careful handwriting, faded slightly but legible. The handwriting of a child who had learned to treat information as currency and stored it where it could not be confiscated. I refreshed it every few days, Ethan said, so it wouldn't fade. Maddox looked at the numbers. He looked at the boy. Did they follow up? Once, a woman came to the house. She sat in the living room with Sandra Whitmore for 45 minutes. Ethan's voice was level. She never asked to see our rooms. She never asked to talk to us alone. He paused. Sandra gave her a plate of cookies to take with her when she left. The wind hit the building. The neon sign outside buzzed and flickered and held. "The case number is still open," Ethan said. "That's what they told me when I called back 2 months later. Still under review." His voice did not break. That was the thing Maddox would think about later, lying awake in the hours before the sun came up. Through all of it, through the map of every closed door, every adult who had looked at this boy and made the decision to look somewhere else, instead the voice did not break. It had learned not to. It had been trained by experience into a shape that did not crack under weight because cracking had costs that this child could not afford. Doc came and sat beside Maddox after Ethan fell asleep. He went finally and voluntarily, his body overriding his mind, the way bodies do when the debt is large enough. He tipped sideways on the couch with his arm around his sister, his face going slack, all the careful management released at once. He looked in sleep exactly his age. A 12-year-old boy. The bruise on his cheek was dark against his skin. "Bruising pattern on both arms," Doc said quietly. "Some of it is 3, maybe 4 weeks old. The cheek is recent. The cut above the eye is middle-aged, 4 to 5 days." He was looking at the children. His voice had its usual quality, the level steadiness that never changed regardless of what he was describing. "There are older marks on Lily's back, faded. I don't think she remembers them." Maddox said nothing for a moment. "How long do you think they've been in the system?" "Long enough for the boy to have a script," Doc said. "He knew exactly what to say and in what order. He knows the language that gets written down. He knows what gets ignored. He knows the case number. He knows the name of the oversight office." A pause. "He has been trying to get someone to listen for close to a year, and nobody did." Nobody did. Maddox got up and walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot. The bikes were covered in snow-white shapes in the dark. Route 9 was invisible. The world beyond the fence line was white and black in the buzzing red of the sign. Boone Clearwater appeared beside him. Boone, who was 6'4" and had spent 14 years as a Navy corpsman and who carried a kind of silence that was not emptiness but compression. Everything pressed in close and held. He looked out the window alongside Maddox without speaking. "What do you want to do?" he said finally. It was not a simple question. It was not asking about tonight. The children were safe for tonight. That part was settled. The question was about the morning, when the system that had failed them would arrive with paperwork and authority in the full institutional weight of procedure and would demand them back. Maddox looked at the parking lot, the bikes disappearing under the accumulation, the empty road beyond the fence line. "I want to know who else they've done this to," he said. Reese Daly found it first. He was at the kitchen table with his phone running, searches through the county records database, the kind of public-facing portal that yielded results if you knew how to look and took longer if you did not. He had been at it for 40 minutes, moving methodically through layers of public information when he found the number. Dale Whitmore had been a licensed foster care provider through Clearwater County for 11 years. In 11 years, he had housed 23 children. Reese stared at the number for a long moment. Then he started cross-referencing. Placement dates, age ranges, duration of stays, most of them short, 3 to 8 months, a few longer. He pulled the DCS inspection records theoretically public, but practically buried under layers of bureaucratic filing structure. Quarterly visits, all marked compliant, all signed off by the same 2 caseworkers, rotating in alternation over the past 6 years. Same 2 caseworkers, every time. 6 years. He found one more thing before he brought it to Maddox. The thing that made him sit back from the screen and stay very still for a moment. He brought it to Maddox at 2 in the morning. Maddox read the printout. A county board meeting agenda from 3 years prior. A community recognition ceremony. Dale Whitmore named a pillar of the foster care community given a plaque. The man who signed the recognition, the county director of Child Protective Services. Same names on 4 of the inspection reports, Reese said quietly. Maddox folded the paper in half. He looked at the sleeping children. He looked at the door. He called Aldrich Finch at 2:15. Aldrich was not a lawyer in the comfortable sense of the word. He was a man who had passed the bar in his second attempt, spent 6 years in public defense, and had developed over time a deep and specific dislike for courtrooms, paired with an equally deep understanding of how power moved through legal systems. He had eventually migrated to civil rights and child welfare cases, the ones nobody else wanted because the fees were thin and the enemies were institutional. He was 55, lived alone outside Harlan Creek, with a filing system that made sense only to him, and he had known Maddox Callahan for 9 years. They did not always agree. They agreed on enough, Maddox explained in 4 sentences. Aldrich was quiet for a moment. DCS will be there as early as 7, he said. The legal pathway to blocking an emergency placement order in the short term is narrow. I need to see the boy. I need his testimony. A pause. And I need whatever documentation exists. Case numbers. Complaint records. I have a case number. That's something. The sound of paper moving. I'm going to make some calls. There's a judge in the district who isn't stupid and who owes me a professional courtesy. It's not a guarantee, but it buys time. A pause. Maddox, this isn't a simple thing you're stepping into. If these people are connected the way you're describing. I know what it is. You know what it costs, too. Maddox looked through the window at the parking lot. Ethan and Lily were asleep behind him. Two small shapes under blankets, the boy's face finally slack. Finally just 12 years old, the bruise on his cheek dark in the low light. Make the calls, Maddox said. At 3:30, the clubhouse had gone quiet, in the particular way of places where people are awake but not talking. Each one turned inward, working through his own version of what the morning was going to require. Doc had come back out and was in the chair nearest the couch, monitoring Lily's fever at intervals, his presence steady and unobtrusive. Colt had coffee on. Boone stood near the front window and watched Route 9, which was still invisible under the snow. Reese was back at the kitchen table still searching, moving from county records to local news archives to the state DCS public complaint portal, building a picture one data point at a time. Maddox sat at the bar with a legal pad and wrote down what they had. Names, dates, case numbers, the 2 caseworker names from the inspection reports, the county director who had handed out the plaque. He drew lines between them and looked at the lines and thought about what they connected and what they implied. At 4:47, a car came down Route 9 and slowed at the lot entrance. Boone said quietly, "Black sedan, county plates, not police." Maddox crossed to the window. The car had parked at the far edge of the lot near the road. Engine running, no one getting out, just sitting there with its lights off. How long, Maddox said. Pulled past once already, maybe 10 minutes ago. Maddox looked at the car. He looked at the dark reflection of the neon sign on its hood. He thought about what it meant that someone had known where to come and when. He thought about the placement order processed in 90 minutes. He thought about the caseworker who had been promoted. He went back to the bar and wrote one more line on the legal pad at the bottom. 23 children. 11 years. Who else knows? Aldrich Finch arrived at 6:12 earlier than expected, and the earliness said something before he spoke a word. He came through the door with his coat still buttoned and his briefcase under one arm, and the expression Maddox had seen on him twice before in 9 years. Both times before hearings that had not gone the way they should have. The judge will hear the petition, Aldrich said. 8:30, but I need you to understand something first. Maddox waited. I spoke to the duty supervisor at the DCS district office last night. Standard courtesy call notifying them of pending legal action before they moved on the placement. Aldrich set his briefcase on the bar and looked at Maddox steadily. The supervisor already knew about the children. She had been notified at 11:30 last night. The room was quiet. Colt had come in from the kitchen and was standing in the doorway. Boone had not moved from his position near the front window. Doc was in the back with the children. Whitmore called it in, Maddox said. Almost certainly. What concerns me is the timing. Aldrich unlatched the briefcase and pulled out a yellow legal folder. 11:30 is fast. They were gone for 2 hours before he noticed in a blizzard. He set the folder on the bar. That is not a foster parent worried about 2 missing children. That is a man managing a situation. He knew they might run, Boone said from the window. Had a response ready, which means someone generated the emergency placement paperwork last night after 11:30, Aldrich said. Standard processing takes 4 hours minimum, 6 under normal staffing. He looked at Maddox. It was approved in 90 minutes. The number sat in the room. Reese had come in from the kitchen and was standing at the edge of the group with his phone in his hand and the expression of someone who had just found something he was not entirely sure he wanted to have found. Those 2 caseworkers, he said, the ones who signed every Whitmore inspection for 6 years. He held up the phone. One of them, woman named Stacy Pruitt. She transferred to the district office 8 months ago. To what position? Aldrich said. Reese looked at him. Duty supervisor. The silence that followed was a different kind than any of the silences before it. Aldrich closed the folder slowly. He looked at Maddox with the expression of a man revising his understanding of the scope of a problem in real time, recalculating the weight of what he was carrying. Ethan was awake. He had not needed to be called. He sat up on the couch with Lily still asleep against him and looked at the room the way he always looked at rooms, reading the temperature of it before anything else. He took in the extra person, the briefcase on the bar, the particular quality of tension that had gathered while he slept. His posture settled by perhaps 5% before he spoke. They know we're here, he said. Not a question. Maddox looked at the boy across the room and decided on the truth. Yeah, they know. Ethan's jaw did the tightening thing. He looked at the floor for a moment, then back up. How long do we have? Couple of hours, maybe. There's a lawyer working on it. Lawyers don't work, Ethan said. Flat. Without bitterness, because bitterness would have implied that the failure of lawyers was a surprise. This one does, Maddox said. Ethan looked at him for a long moment with the focused attention of someone administering a test. Measuring the distance between what this man said and what men like him actually did at distance, Ethan had learned through repetition to expect to be very large. What if the judge says no, he said, then we figure out the next thing. That's not an answer. No, Maddox said, it's not. Colt appeared from his kitchen with a plate of toast and set it on the coffee table near Ethan's knee. Ethan looked at it. He picked up a piece and ate it standing, watching Maddox with the steady attention of someone who was not done measuring. Then he pulled up his left sleeve. The case number on his inner forearm, small and careful in fading blue ink. There were others, Ethan said. Before us, the Whitmores had other kids. I saw pictures on the wall in the hallway, old ones. Kids who weren't there when we got placed. He paused. I asked Sandra once where they went. She said they moved on to better situations. Another pause. She smiled when she said it. Reese looked at Maddox. Maddox looked at Aldrich, who was already writing. Do you remember any names? Aldrich asked. From the pictures, anything, Ethan thought. His face did the compression thing, information being sorted and retrieved. There was a boy named Corbett, maybe 10 or 11 in the picture. Dale called him a good kid once when he didn't know I was listening. He paused. Said Corbett knew how to behave. The words sat in the room and said the thing that none of them said aloud. There was a girl, too, younger. I don't know her name. She had red hair. Reese was already on his phone. Outside through the patch window where the sedan had been parked, there was nothing now. The car had gone some time in the last hour without anyone seeing it leave, which was worse than if it had stayed. The absence of visible threat was not the same thing as the absence of threat. Maddox understood this in his bones. He looked at Ethan, who was still standing with the toast in his hand, still watching him with those eyes that held 12 years of age and something considerably older running beneath it. The boy had walked 6 miles through a Montana blizzard in canvas shoes, carrying his 6-year-old sister, because every other door had already closed. He had not run out of fear. He had run out of options. And this door, this impossible door belonging to these impossible men, was the one still lit. Maddox picked up his coffee, cold again. He went back to the bar and looked at the legal pad and the web of names and lines and wrote nothing further, because what needed to be done next could not be done with a pen. Dawn was coming. Whatever was going to happen next was going to happen in the light. And somewhere in the dark beyond the tree line, something was already in motion. Cord Dillard came through the side door at 7 minutes past 7. Not the front, not with a knock. Through the side entrance that led in from the parking lot where the bikes were stored, the one with the stiff latch that Boone had been meaning to fix since November and had not gotten to. He came in quietly without announcing himself, and he stood in the short hallway between the side door and the main room for approximately 4 seconds before Colt Beaumont, coming out of the kitchen with a coffee pot, saw him and stopped. The 4 seconds were enough to establish several things. Cord Dillard was approximately 50 years old, medium height, with the kind of body that had once been very fit and was still capable in the specific way of a machine that has been maintained rather than exercised. His coat was dark and plain and expensive in a way that announced nothing and said everything. Not flashy, not cheap. The coat of a man who had stopped needing his clothing to do any work for him because he announced himself through other means. His hands were visible and empty, which was a choice rather than an oversight. His eyes moved across the room the way the eyes of people who have spent a long time assessing rooms and the people in them move. Quick, thorough, unhurried despite the speed. He looked at Colt with the expression of a man who had already decided that Colt was not the person he was here to speak with. "I'm not here for trouble," he said. Colt set the coffee pot on the nearest flat surface and crossed his arms, which in Colt's case was a statement of its own. "That entrance says different." "I knocked on the front, nobody answered." A pause. The door was open. This was probably true. In the controlled chaos of the morning, with Aldrich Finch arriving and Reese running searches and Maddox at the bar with the legal pad, it was possible, which was precisely the kind of detail that a man like Cord Dillard would file away and use. The true thing that sat beside the misleading implication, like a well-dressed lie close enough to be mistaken for it. Maddox appeared from the main room. He took one look at the man in the hallway and felt the air change. Not the way it changed when something loud was coming. The way it changed before something quiet. The bad that wore a plain, expensive coat and kept its hands where you could see them and had already done its math before it walked through your door. "Who are you?" Maddox said. "My name doesn't matter for this conversation." The man's voice was unhurried in a way that was itself a form of pressure. "What matters is the offer. Nobody invited you in." "No," Dillard said. "They didn't." He looked at Maddox with the steady patience of someone who had done this before and knew the shape of how it went. "Mr. Callahan, you're about to walk into a county courtroom with documentation you believe will support a petition for emergency protective placement. I'm here to tell you before you do that there's a simpler path." Maddox said nothing. He was listening the way he listened when he was not interested in what was being said, but was very interested in what the saying of it revealed. "The children are returned to DCS custody this morning, voluntarily. No incident. An internal review of the Whitmore placement is initiated immediately. A real review, not paper. The children are moved to a different placement within the week." Dillard paused. "You have my word that it will be appropriate." "Your word," Maddox said. "My word and the word of people with the capacity to ensure it." The hallway was narrow. Boone had appeared behind Maddox without sound, the way large men with combat backgrounds sometimes moved when they chose to. Doc was somewhere behind him. The geometry of the space had shifted without anyone making an obvious move. "And if I walk into that courtroom," Maddox said. "Then this becomes complicated," Dillard said. "For everyone." He let the pause do the work it was built to do. Your club's licensing, your members' records, the kind of attention that arrives when organizations with certain histories insert themselves into child welfare matters. Another pause. "You have good people here, Mr. Callahan. People with reasons to avoid that kind of scrutiny." The mention of Ghost's custody situation was not in those words. It did not need to be. The implication was architectural, load-bearing, present in the space between the sentences the way a threat is most effective when it does not fully materialize. Maddox looked at the man for a long moment. He looked at the coat, the hands, the unhurried certainty of someone who had offered this kind of arrangement before, and expected it to work because it had worked before. "Get out of my building," he said. Dillard looked at him for one beat longer. Then he nodded once, the nod of a man recording a data point rather than conceding one, and he turned and went back through the side door and the latch clicked behind him. Boone looked at Maddox. "That's not a county official." "No," Maddox said, "he's not." Ghost had heard it from his position at the bar. He had heard most of it. He stood in the hallway entrance with his coffee mug and his dark eyes in the expression of a man whose situation had just been referenced without his consent by a stranger who should not have known it existed. "He knows about my daughter," Ghost said. He implied it. "How does he know about my daughter?" "Same way he knew to come here, same way the placement order went through in 90 minutes. Maddox looked at him directly. "Someone has been maintaining a file, watching." Ghost set his coffee mug down on the hallway shelf with the careful precision of a man whose hands want to do something else entirely. He looked at the side door. He looked at it for a long time without speaking. "Who is he?" Ghost said. "I don't know yet," Maddox said, "but I'm going to find out." Reese found the shape of Cord Dillard at 9 in the morning, moving through 3 layers of publicly accessible records before the picture emerged clearly enough to read. On paper, Dillard was a private consultant. His registered business, Clearwater Advocacy Solutions, had been incorporated 7 years ago in Billings. The stated purpose per the filing was community welfare consulting and family services coordination. In 7 years, Clearwater Advocacy Solutions had received 11 contracts from Clearwater County totaling $460,000. Every contract from the same county department. Every one signed by the same chain of department heads, going back to a director named Caswell who had retired 3 years ago and forward to the current director, a man named Prine. Reese kept pulling. Prine's wife sat on the board of a youth housing nonprofit. 18 months ago, that nonprofit had received a $70,000 grant from the Whitmore Family Foundation. "Whitmore has a foundation," Reese said, coming into the main room with his laptop. "Had one," Maddox said, reading the screen. "Dissolved 2 years ago." Reese nodded. "Right around the time a state audit of county DCS expenditures was announced." He scrolled. The audit was later described as routine and returned no findings of concern. "Who ran it?" Reese looked at him. "The county attorney's office, Gerald Fitch." The web had a center. Maddox could feel it without being able to see it yet. Not Dale Whitmore. Whitmore was a mechanism. A licensed community pillar baseball coaching mechanism with a plaque on his wall and 23 children processed through his house across 11 years. And above him, something that had maintained the machinery that kept the mechanism running. Something that had ensured the inspection stayed clean and the complaints stayed buried and the money kept moving. But before Maddox could follow that line further, Reese found the thing that changed the shape of everything. He had been searching Dillard's business history when he found the prior registration. Before Clearwater Advocacy Solutions 7 years ago, Dillard had dissolved another company. It had operated for 4 years across 3 counties in Montana and Wyoming. Its name was Sentinel Youth Placement Services, a private placement coordination service, a broker between foster families and county DCS offices. Voluntarily dissolved after a state inquiry in Wyoming that returned no findings. The inquiry had been led by a state assistant attorney general. His name was David Marsh. David Marsh was currently a federal district court judge in Billings. He held jurisdiction over every federal-level case arising from county DCS misconduct in this district. Maddox stood very still when Reese showed him the screen. He read the filing dates. He read the inquiry dates. He read the current judicial appointment. "The man who investigated Sentinel," Maddox said, "and found nothing, now sits on the federal bench that would hear any case that goes above the county level." "Yeah," Reese said. "That's not proximity," Boone said from the doorway. "That's architecture." Ghost appeared beside Maddox and read the screen. He read it twice. His face did the thing it did when processing something that required his geometry to accommodate a new and unwelcome truth. He looked at Maddox. "This doesn't stay in Moley's courtroom," he said. "Not if it goes where it should go," Maddox said. And if the people who built this know it doesn't stay in Moley's courtroom, they'll move to make sure it never gets there. I know. Ghost looked at the screen one more time. Then he walked back to the bar without saying anything else. But he stayed. Doc pulled Maddox aside near the back hallway at 10 in the morning. He had been in the back room with the children and had come out with the particular quality of movement that meant he had something to say that required saying away from other ears. I reached someone, Doc said, through the Veterans Outreach Network, former placement kid. His name is Corbett Hale. He's 20 years old, currently living in Billings working maintenance at a hotel. Maddox waited. He was placed with the Whitmores at age 9, removed at age 11. He's been trying to talk to someone with standing for 2 years. He has a case file with a state victim advocacy office that has been marked pending review for 14 months. Doc paused, the steadiness fully engaged now the way it got when he was containing something that required active containment. Maddox, what he told the advocacy office, the reason the file is pending review, it's not just physical abuse. Maddox held very still. Tell me. Doc told him. It took 3 minutes. During those 3 minutes, Maddox did not move, and his expression did not change in any way visible from across the room. But something happened behind his eyes that the men who knew him would have recognized immediately. The specific compression of a person absorbing information that reorganizes everything they understood to be true, and who is deciding in real time what to do with the reorganized version. When Doc finished, Maddox turned and walked to the far end of the bar and stood there with both hands flat on the surface and his head down and breathed for 30 seconds. Nobody approached him, because this had never been about paperwork. The inspections and the overrides and the contracts and the dissolved foundation. Those were the cover, the visible surface of something that went much deeper and much darker. The darkness was not administrative. It was not the grinding corruption of people protecting careers and golf handicaps and plaques. It was the kind of darkness that used children, not neglected them, used them, and then moved them through the system quietly with documentation and county overrides and pending reviews to wherever they needed to go, and made sure no one with standing was listening when the children tried to speak. 17 children with no traceable outcome. Maddox raised his head. He looked through the doorway at Ethan, who was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of water, and the boy looked back at him. And in Ethan's face, Maddox saw the thing he had not fully understood until this moment. Why the fear had looked familiar when the boy walked through the door the night before. It was not the fear of a child afraid of a bad home. It was the fear of a child who had seen something he was not supposed to see and had understood with the terrible clarity that children develop when no one is protecting them, that the seeing of it put him in danger. Ethan, Maddox said, come here. He sat across from the boy at the kitchen table. Doc was nearby but not close. The room cleared without being asked to clear. I need to ask you something, Maddox said, and I need you to tell me the truth, whatever it is. Ethan looked at him. Okay. Did you ever see men come to the Whitmore house? Not DCS, not anyone official, men you didn't know who came and stayed for a while. The change in Ethan's face was immediate and involuntary, a flinch small controlled almost before it fully formed, the reflex of someone trying not to react to a word that had too much weight behind it. He looked at the table for a moment, then he looked back up. Once, he said, about 6 months ago, 3 men. They came on a Friday night and they stayed until Sunday morning. They used the room at the end of the hall. He paused. We were told to stay in our room. Did you? Lily did. His jaw tightened. I saw one of them once, coming out of the bathroom in the hall, the tallest one. What kind of look did he give you? Ethan was quiet for a long moment. He stared at the grain of the table, and Maddox could see the decision happening behind his eyes. Not whether to tell the truth, but how to put language around something that had lived below language, in the part of a person where things go when there are no words safe enough to hold them. Like I wasn't a person, Ethan said quietly. Like I was something in a room. Maddox held the edge of the table under his hands. Did he say anything to you? No. Dale came out of the kitchen and saw him looking at me and told me to get back in my room. A pause. Dale's voice was scared. I'd never heard him sound scared before. He looked up. That was the first time I thought about running. I waited because it was winter and Lily was sick. I waited until there was a storm big enough that the footprints would disappear. Maddox looked at him for a long moment. At the split lip and the old bruises and the eyes that held 12 years of age and something decades older running underneath. You did everything right, he said. Ethan looked at him. Something moved in his face, a crack in the careful management small and quickly closed. Nobody ever said that before. I know, Maddox said. Doc got Corbett Hale moving from Billings at noon, 4-hour drive. He would arrive by late afternoon. At 2 in the afternoon, the trouble came from inside the building. Maddox heard it before he reached the hallway. The acoustic signature of a confrontation that had moved past its opening exchange voices low and tight in the way voices get when people are past performing for witnesses. He came around the corner and found Ghost and Reese in the short hallway near the side door. Ghost had Reese's laptop under his arm. Reese had his hand out for it. Neither of them had moved. What is this? Maddox said. Ghost looked at him. His face had the compressed quality from the morning but shifted. Less managing conflict, more the pressure of a man who had made a decision he had not yet delivered. Reese sent something out 15 minutes ago before I saw it. Maddox looked at Reese. What did you send? Reese held Ghost's gaze for a moment, then looked at Maddox. The contract documents, the Clearwater Advocacy Solutions filings, the Sentinel Incorporation and Dissolution records, the Prime nonprofit connection. He paused. I sent them to a reporter, Sarah Vance, Helena Tribune. She covers county government. She has been trying to get documentation on DCS contracting irregularities for 8 months. The hallway was quiet. You went outside this building without talking to me, Maddox said. I went outside this building before Dillard could make those documents disappear, Reese said. Because that is what is happening. That is what has been happening for 11 years. Everything gets buried. You know that. I know that. Those documents exist right now on a county server and in Dillard's hands and in Prine's hands. If we wait for the perfect moment, they disappear. Like everything else disappeared. Like Corbett Hale disappeared. Like 17 kids disappeared. Or you just handed them leverage, Ghost said. His voice was level, not hostile, something colder than hostile. The precise geometry of a man identifying a structural problem. Now they know what we have. They know exactly what we sent. And if they have reach into a Helena newsroom, they don't have reach into Sarah Vance. Reese looked at Ghost directly. I know her work. 8 months of bylines on DCS contracting without a payoff. You don't work a story for 8 months without a payoff unless you're doing it because you believe in it. Or you haven't found the right price yet, Ghost said. And you don't know which. Reese went quiet, not conceding, grinding against the possibility that Ghost was right the way a person grinds against a truth they cannot disprove. Maddox took the laptop from under Ghost's arm. He looked at the sent folder still open on the screen. The email to Sarah Vance, timestamp 204, 4 attachments, 47 pages total. He could not unsend it. He handed the laptop back to Reese. Next time you go outside this building, Maddox said, you tell me first. You find the time. These people know how to dismantle organizations, Reese. You know what we just gave them if Vance has been turned. Evidence that the Steel Reapers are actively investigating county officials. That is not a lawsuit. That becomes something else. I know what it is, Reese said. He was holding the laptop against his chest now, and his jaw was set, and the thing in his face was not defiance, but its more complicated cousin. The expression of someone who believes they did the right thing and is absorbing the weight of what right things sometimes cost. But those kids didn't have time for the perfect moment. They never had time. That's the whole point. The hallway was silent. Ghost had stepped back slightly. The anger in his body had changed frequency, not resolved, shifted. He looked at the side door. He looked at the laptop. He looked at Reese. "She'll call back," Reese said. "Within the hour. If she doesn't, I was wrong." Maddox looked at him. He looked at the side door. He looked at the legal pad on the bar with its web of names and lines. "If she doesn't call back," Maddox said, "we have a bigger problem than the one we have right now." He walked back toward the main room. Sarah Vance called back at 2:51. Reese took it in the kitchen on speaker with Maddox beside him and Ghost standing in the doorway with his arms crossed and his coffee untouched. Her voice was quick and controlled in the way of a journalist who has been sitting on a story for a long time and has just been handed the piece that makes it printable. "The Clearwater Advocacy Solutions contracts. I've had Prine's name for 4 months. I couldn't connect the DCS expenditures to anything traceable without the foundation link." A pause. "It's traceable now." "Yes," Reese said. "Who are you?" "Someone with standing and 2 children who need the next 24 hours to matter." A longer pause. "I need to verify these documents independently. That takes time." "How much?" Maddox said from across the table. "A beat." "Who's that?" "The person who decides whether you get a second set of documents or not." "How much time do you need?" 12 hours, maybe 10 if I push." "You have 8, Maddox said. "We're filing supplemental testimony with the court by tomorrow morning. You can either be ready to run a story when that happens, or you can spend your 12 hours verifying and miss the window." Silence on the line. The calculating silence of a journalist running a risk assessment. "I need a source on record," she said finally. "Not for print, for verification. Someone who can confirm the Whitmore placements." "You'll have one," Maddox said, "by 6 tonight. And the children? You won't have their names. What you'll have is documentation of an 11-year pattern and a former placement who is willing to speak on record." He paused. "His name is Corbett Hale. He's 20 years old. He's been waiting for someone to ask him for 2 years." Another silence. Softer this time. 8 hours, she said. "I'll be ready." The call ended. Ghost looked at the window. His arms were still crossed. The coffee on the table beside him had gone completely cold. "You were right about the timing," he said to Reese without turning. Reese looked at him. "I still think you should have said something first." Ghost paused. "But you were right about the timing." Reese nodded once. The small nod of a younger man receiving hard acknowledgement from an older one, the kind that doesn't quite fit in the chest, but matters more than it should. Corbett Hale arrived at 4:40 in the afternoon in a 10-year-old Civic with a cracked taillight and a St. Christopher medal hanging from the mirror, the only thing he had kept from a placement after the Whitmores given to him by a woman named Sister Agnes, who had told him that some people were worth fighting for. He was 20 years old, and he was small in the way that people who did not get enough food during formative years are sometimes small, not slight, compressed. The growth trajectory quietly interrupted by circumstances that had nothing to do with genetics. He had a scar above his right ear faded to a silver line, and he walked through the front door of the Steel Reaper clubhouse with his hands loose at his sides and his chin level, and the expression of someone who had rehearsed this moment many times in a hotel room in Billings and was now doing it for real and was not going to let the realness of it change anything about how he intended to conduct himself. He stopped when he saw Ethan. The two of them looked at each other across the room, the 20-year-old and the 12-year-old. Something passed between them that had no name in the available vocabulary. Not recognition. They had never met. Something more like the moment when a mirror shows you a version of yourself from a different angle, at a different age, and you understand with sudden clarity that the image is accurate. The before and the still in it, standing 10 feet apart, reading each other. Ethan's jaw tightened. He looked at the scar above Corbett's ear. Corbett looked at the bruise on Ethan's cheek, at the split lip, at the way the boy was holding himself. Neither of them spoke. Doc put his hand briefly on Corbett's shoulder and guided him to the table where Aldrich Finch was waiting with a legal pad and a recording device in the specific quiet patience of a man who understood the weight of what he was about to be given. Maddox stayed near the back of the room and let it happen. Corbett talked for 40 minutes. He talked in the flat, careful, precisely ordered way of someone who has told the story in his own head so many times that the sequence has calcified into its most accurate form. All the approximations stripped out, only the verified facts remaining. He talked about the Friday nights, the men in the hallway, the room at the end of the hall. He talked about what happened in that room, and he used the exact language, and he did not look away from Aldrich's face while he said it, and his voice did not break. Not once, though it came close twice, and he stopped and breathed both times and then continued. Lily was in the back room with Colt, who was teaching her a card game. Her voice was audible through the wall, bright and certain. Ethan listened from the doorway. He did not move for the full 40 minutes. When Corbett was done, Aldrich looked at his legal pad for a long moment. Then he looked up. "Corbett," he said, "what you've just told me constitutes a pattern of criminal conduct that goes significantly beyond what a civil petition addresses. What I do tonight involves more than a court filing." "I know," Corbett said. "There will be attention, media, legal processes, possibly federal." Corbett looked at him with steady eyes shaped by the specific education of being failed repeatedly by the systems designed to protect you. "Mr. Finch," he said, "I've been trying to do something about this for 2 years. I don't have any hesitation left." He paused. "I just want someone to do something with what I have." Aldrich held his gaze for a moment. Then he wrote something on the legal pad and turned it toward Corbett. "I'm going to do something with it." Maddox's phone rang at 5:40. Unknown number different from Dillard's earlier call. A second prepaid, which meant resources and patience and operational awareness. Maddox picked up. "You spoke to Hale." Dillard's voice. The carefully maintained calm from the morning was gone. What was in its place was not anger, but something more controlled than anger, and therefore more dangerous. The voice of a man recalibrating around a new threat assessment. "You understand what that means?" "I understand what it means," Maddox said. "Hale's testimony goes to places that involve people with resources you haven't begun to account for. This isn't Whitmore. This isn't Prine. This isn't county politics." A pause. "There are people who have been managing this situation for a very long time. They are not going to allow one motorcycle club in Harlan Creek to... We're not asking for permission." "I know you're not." The voice dropped. Not a threat, something more honest. The voice of a man who had seen what happened when the people he worked for moved against problems they could not absorb. "Mr. Callahan, I am telling you as directly as I can. There are individuals connected to this arrangement who do not manage situations through lawyers and county hearings. You have until midnight to withdraw voluntarily. After that, I cannot..." The front window of the clubhouse exploded inward. Not a bullet. A chunk of concrete the size of a closed fist that hit the glass at an angle and blew it inward in a cascade of fragments that scattered across the floor and caught the low light like a broken constellation. The cold came through the gap immediately sharp and total. Everyone in the room was on their feet before the sound finished echoing. Maddox had dropped the phone and moved toward the window, but Boone was already there looking out through the gap into the parking lot. "2 vehicles," Boone said. "Lot entrance, not county plates." Ghost had moved to the side door, his body angled, his hand at his back. "How many?" "4 visible. More behind the second vehicle." Doc was already moving toward the back room where Colt was with Lily, covering distance fast and without wasted motion. Reese pulled his laptop away from the window. Aldrich was on his feet with his briefcase. Ethan stood in the kitchen doorway. He was not panicking. He was watching Maddox with the expression of a boy who had walked through a blizzard and knocked on the door of strangers and had been met for the first time in 2 years and 3 months with something other than a wall, and who was now watching very carefully to see if that something would hold under pressure. Maddox looked at him. He looked at the broken window and the cold air pouring through it and the headlights in the parking lot sitting still, not moving. Just present the way things are present when they want to be seen, when they want you to understand the scale of what is being applied. He picked the phone up from the floor. The call was still connected. "Dillard," he said. A pause. "Yes." Tell whoever is in my parking lot that they have 30 seconds to back those vehicles up before this stops being manageable for anyone. He kept his voice level. The levelness was its own form of force. And then you and I are going to have a very different conversation about what it means to do this in front of two children. He walked to the window and stood in the gap where the glass had been, in the cold air and full view of the headlights. He looked out at the two vehicles with the specific stillness of a man who had stood in worse places than this one and had learned that the decision to not be moved was itself a form of action. Behind him, without a word spoken, every reaper in the building came to the windows and the doors, not with weapons drawn, not in aggressive posture, simply present, simply visible. Bodies that had made a decision and were expressing it by standing still and being seen. In the back room through the wall, Colt's voice was audible, low and calm, saying something to Lily, and Lily's small voice answering, and the sound of cards being laid on a table. The deliberate, ordinary sound of a man who had decided that the most important thing he could do right now was make sure a 6-year-old girl did not hear what was happening on the other side of the wall and understand it for what it was. Maddox counted the seconds. 28, 29. At 31, one set of headlights extinguished, then the other. The vehicles remained in the lot. Two dark shapes at the entrance engines, idling, exhaust visible in the cold air. But the lights were off, and the going off of the lights was its own communication. We see you seeing us, not tonight, but this is not over. Good decision, Maddox said into the phone. The line was dead. Dillard had already hung up. The vehicles idled for another 40 seconds. Then they reversed slowly out of the lot entrance and onto Route 9, and their taillights disappeared into the dark tree line. Nobody in the building moved for a long moment. Then Ghost exhaled a single controlled breath and turned from the window. The room began to decompress. Boone moved away from the side door. Reese set his laptop down. The particular readjustment of people who have been at readiness and are stepping down from it. Colt appeared from the back hallway. He looked at Maddox. Maddox shook his head slightly. Not yet. They covered the broken window with a moving blanket fixed at the corners with duct tape. The cold dropped to a manageable seep. The neon sign outside no longer had glass to catch the light. Maddox looked at the room. He looked at Corbett Hale, who had not moved from his chair at the table during any of it, who had sat with his hands flat on the surface and his chin level, and the expression of a 20-year-old who had been scared for so long that the fear had become a different texture. Worn smooth, familiar, something he could function inside rather than be stopped by. You still want to do this, Maddox said. Corbett looked at him. They just put a rock through your window. Yeah, and you're asking if I want to do this. I'm asking. Corbett looked at Ethan, who had come out of the kitchen doorway and was sitting on the arm of the couch watching. The two of them held each other's gaze for a moment, the before and the still in it, that wordless mirror recognition. Yeah, Corbett said. I want to do this. Aldrich left at 6:15 with Corbett's recorded testimony and 47 pages of documentation in the expression of a man carrying something more fragile and more important than anything he had carried in years. He would work through the night. He would file at 7 in the morning. Maddox walked him to his car. The parking lot was empty. The cold had settled back into its steady Montana state. Temperature in the low 20s, the sky a deep clear black, with stars hard and bright, the way they got at altitude. He stood in the lot after Aldrich's car disappeared and thought about Dillard's words before the window broke. The words chosen with care to convey one specific piece of information: that there was a layer above the lawyers and the county hearings, a layer that operated by different rules, a layer that had now been activated. He thought about the vehicles in the lot, the concrete through the window, the calculated nature of it. Not an attack, a demonstration. Look at what we can do. Look at how little your walls mean to us. He thought about 17 children with no traceable outcome. He went back inside. Sarah Vance called it 7:42. Reese took it on speaker at the kitchen table with Maddox beside him, and Ghost standing in the doorway with a fresh coffee he had not drunk. Her voice had shifted from the afternoon call. The controlled efficiency was still there, but underneath it was something else now. A thinness. The sound of someone who had spent the last 5 hours reading documents that had altered their understanding of something they thought they already understood. The contracts are verified, she said. All 11. I pulled the county payment records independently. They match. The Whitmore Foundation grant to the Prime nonprofit is in the public 990 filings. A pause. The Clearwater Advocacy Solutions filings. I pulled Dillard's full business registration history. She paused, and this pause was not for effect. Before Clearwater Advocacy Solutions, he had another company, dissolved 8 years ago. Sentinel Youth Placement Services, Maddox said. A brief silence. You already know. We found it this morning. Then you know about David Marsh. Tell me what you have on him. He ran the inquiry. That's public record. Whether the inquiry was compromised, whether he was working with Sentinel rather than investigating it, I don't have that confirmed. I have a timeline and a proximity. Another pause, heavier. But I also have a source, a former Wyoming DCS employee who worked during the Sentinel years and filed an internal complaint that was dismissed. She's been sitting on it for 6 years. She corroborates the placement brokering. She says children were directed to specific homes through Sentinel that DCS would not have approved through standard channels. She says she tried to escalate and was told the inquiry had cleared everything. A beat. She's willing to go on record. The sound of everyone in the room breathing. Print it, Maddox said. I need the legal action on record first. Otherwise, it's me and a former employee against a federal judge's proximity to a dissolved company. That story doesn't survive the first call from Marsh's attorneys. Aldrich files at 7 tomorrow morning. Then I publish at 7 tomorrow morning. A pause. Mr. Callahan, this is going to move fast once it's out. It needs to move fast, Maddox said. That's the only way it doesn't get buried like everything else. The call ended. Ghost set his coffee down. He looked at the ceiling with the expression of a man who had finished recalculating the scope of the situation he was standing in and had arrived at a number larger than any previous estimate. Federal judge, he said. Proximity, Maddox said. Not confirmed. Proximity to a federal judge is still proximity to a federal judge. Ghost looked at him. Something in his face had shifted. The calculation finished, the answer reached and accepted. I need to make a call, he said. He pulled out his phone and walked to the far end of the kitchen, and Maddox did not listen because it was not his to hear. Ghost came back 4 minutes later. He set his phone on the table. She's at her grandmother's in Great Falls, he said. She got there an hour ago. Maddox nodded. Her mother thinks I'm paranoid. You're not. Ghost looked at the covered window, the moving blanket shifting slightly in the draft. He looked at the neon sign through the front glass, still buzzing red and amber, the same as it had been when Ethan walked through the door 18 hours ago, with his sister in his arms and 5 words and nowhere else left to go. What time do we need to be ready? Ghost said. Aldrich files at 7, Vance publishes simultaneously. If they move to block the filing, they'll move between 6 and 7. That's when the window is narrowest. Ghost nodded. He picked up his cold coffee and held it without drinking. He looked at the couch where Ethan and Lily were asleep again. Lily's arm draped across her brother's lap, both of them finally under the full weight of the day. He looked at Corbett Hale at the end of the table with a piece of pie Doc had arranged for him, picking at it slowly the way people eat when they are not yet used to meals being uncomplicated. Get some sleep, Ghost said to Maddox. In a while. Ghost moved toward the back hall. He stopped without turning. Maddox. A pause. Those kids have been through the worst. He disappeared down the hall. Maddox sat alone at the bar with the legal pad and the cold coffee and the neon sign and the particular silence of late night when the performance of the day has fallen away completely and what remains is just the unedited fact of things. He thought about Dillard's last real words before the concrete came through the window. I cannot, not will not, cannot. The word of a man who understood he was managing forces he did not control, who had made his offer in good faith from his own perspective, because his own survival was threaded through this arrangement, and he knew what the people above him were capable of, and was in his own way also trapped. He thought about 23 children across 11 years in 17 with no traceable outcome. He thought about Ethan writing a case number on his forearm in pen and refreshing it every few days so it would not fade. The handwriting of a child who had learned to treat information as currency and stored it where it could not be confiscated. The only safe place left. At 4:47 in the morning, his phone rang. Unknown number, Montana area code. The voice on the other end was a woman, middle-aged, careful, calling from a location she considered at least partially safe, but not entirely. Mr. Callahan, she said, my name is Patricia Greer. I was a DCS caseworker in Clearwater County for 9 years. I resigned 14 months ago. Maddox straightened on his stool. I know what's in the documents you sent to Sarah Vance. I know because I'm the one who started compiling them 4 years ago before I understood the full scope of what I was looking at. A pause, and in the pause the sound of wind at her location. Outdoor sounds. A woman standing somewhere outside in the early morning cold. I couldn't finish it. I had a family. They made that clear to me. Who made it clear? Dillard, and someone above Dillard. Another pause. I kept copies. I kept everything. I've been waiting for someone with real standing to be in a position where I could add what I have without getting buried alone. Maddox's hand tightened on the phone. What do you have? Names, she said. The principals. Not just Whitmore and Prine. The people who used the system they built. The ones who traveled to Harlan Creek and stayed at the Whitmore house on Friday nights. A beat. I have 6 names, Mr. Callahan. 2 of them are men whose names you would recognize without any context at all. The neon sign buzzed. The moving blanket over the broken window shifted in the draft. From the couch, Ethan's breathing was audible, slow and deep. The breathing of a boy who was finally asleep rather than listening for sounds in the dark. Can you get here by 6, Maddox said. I'm 40 minutes out, she said. I've been sitting in my car since midnight. She had been waiting, sitting in the dark on a side road 40 minutes away, watching to see if the lights of the Steel Reaper clubhouse would still be burning in the hours before dawn, waiting to see if the particular people who had decided not to move would still be standing when the night ran out. Drive careful, he said. Roads are icy near the junction. He hung up. He sat with the phone in his hand for a moment. Then he got up and walked to the back hall and knocked on Doc's door, and Doc answered in 3 seconds, already awake, and Maddox said 2 sentences, and Doc was up and moving. He woke Ghost next, then Boone. He let Reese sleep another 30 minutes. The kid had been running for 18 hours and would need to be sharp. He made coffee. He stood at the kitchen window and watched the dark road and the tree line and the stars going dim at the eastern edge of the sky, and thought about a woman who had been sitting in her car in the dark for 5 hours with 6 names in her possession and a family she had been afraid for and 14 months of waiting behind her. Outside on Route 9, headlights appeared, moving slowly. A 10-year-old Subaru with a cracked front bumper, the careful pace of someone who had been alert for hours and was maintaining it. The car stopped at the lot entrance. Maddox went to the front door and opened it before she knocked. Patricia Greer was 52, with the kind of face that had been tired for a long time and had stopped trying to conceal it. Not defeated, just honest. She was carrying a backpack and a manila envelope, and she wore a coat that was good for Montana winters, and she walked through the door with her chin up and her hands steady and the expression of a woman who had been afraid for 14 months and had decided somewhere on a dark road between wherever she had been and here to stop leading with the fear. She looked at Maddox. She looked at the covered window. She looked at the 2 children on the couch, Ethan still asleep with Lily's arm across his lap. She looked at the legal pad on the bar with its web of names and lines and circled numbers. You got further than I expected, she said. You got here faster than I expected, Maddox said. She almost smiled. Almost. I've been ready for a year. I was just waiting for someone who wouldn't stop. She set the backpack on the bar and unzipped it. Inside a portable hard drive, a stack of documents in a folder with a rubber band around it, two USB drives labeled in small, precise handwriting. What I have corroborates your documents and extends them considerably. She paused. She looked at Maddox directly. When I tell you the names I have, there is no version of what happens next where this stays at the county level. You understand that? I understand. The people attached to these names will not respond the way Dillard responded. They will not send vehicles to park in your lot. She held his gaze. They will move harder and faster, through channels that may not be stoppable in time. The building was quiet behind her. The coffee was on. The reapers who were awake were present in the room. Ghost at the bar, Boone near the door, Doc in the kitchen doorway. Their presence visible in Patricia Greer's peripheral vision, the wall of them scarred and complicated, and none of them uncomplicated by what they had lived through, and none of them moving. Maddox looked at her. "Tell me the names," he said. She opened the folder. She took out a single sheet of paper, not the documentation, just a list. 6 lines in the same small, precise handwriting as the USB labels. She set it on the bar in front of him. He read the first 2 names. He understood immediately what she had meant. He set the paper down. He looked at the covered window. He looked at Ethan's sleeping face, at the boy's hand still holding his sister's. Even in sleep, the automatic constant gesture of a child who had been someone's only constant for 2 years and 3 months and had not yet learned to stop. Reese appeared in the kitchen doorway, blinking, drawn by the sound of voices. He looked at Patricia Greer. He looked at Maddox's face. "What happened?" he said. Maddox looked up from the list. Outside on Route 9, a vehicle was slowing. Not turning into the lot. Not yet. Just slowing the way vehicles slow when they are looking for a specific address in the dark and have found it. The engine sound was wrong for a sedan. Too heavy, too deliberate. Boone had heard it too. He was already at the window. "2 trucks," he said. "Different from last night. These aren't county." Ghost was on his feet. Maddox looked at the list. He looked at the clock above the bar. 5:22 in the morning. Aldrich Finch would begin filing in 68 minutes. The window between now and then was the only window that mattered to whoever was in those trucks. And they had come for it in the dark, in the cold, with the particular patience of people who understood that the hour before dawn was when things were most vulnerable and least offended. The trucks on Route 9 did not turn into the lot. They slowed. They held their speed. The particular deceleration of vehicles that are not stopping but are marking a location, reading it, confirming what they came to confirm. Then they continued north. Their taillights went around the curve in the road and were swallowed by the dark tree line. Boone watched the window for a full minute. Nobody moved. "Scouting," Ghost said. "Yeah," Maddox said. "They'll come back." He looked at the clock. He looked at Patricia Greer, who was standing at the bar with her backpack and her 14 months of waiting and her 6 names watching him with the expression of a woman who had made her decision on a dark road and was not reconsidering it now. "Reese," he said, "get Aldrich on the phone right now. Tell him we have additional documentation. Tell him to push the filing time to 6:30 if he can get the clerk to accept it early. The earlier it's on record, the harder it is to stop." Reese was already moving. Maddox turned to Patricia Greer. "The hard drive. Walk me through it." And outside, somewhere on Route 9, 2 trucks were turning around in the dark, coming back. The hard drive contained 11 years of wire transfers. Patricia Greer walked Maddox through it at the kitchen table while Reese copied the files and Boone watched Route 9 through the front window, and the clock above the bar moved toward 5:30. She spoke in the careful, organized way of someone who had rehearsed this presentation many times in the quiet of a car parked on dark roads, waiting for a moment that kept not arriving. The transfers were not hidden. They had never needed to be hidden because the people responsible for finding them were the same people facilitating them. Foundation disbursements flowing from the Whitmore Family Foundation to 3 nonprofit entities across 2 states. Consulting payments from Clearwater County to Clearwater Advocacy Solutions. A third channel, quieter than the other two, running through a shell entity incorporated in Wyoming that appeared in no public filing Reese had found because it predated the public records portal by 4 years. 11 years of money moving in a pattern that was not visible if you looked at any single piece of it and became unmistakable if you looked at all of it together. And the correspondence? Emails between Dillard and the two names at the top of Patricia Greer's list. 17 months of them collected during the period when she still had access to the district server. Professional in tone, careful in language. The language of people who understood that written communication created records and had developed over time a vocabulary that conveyed meaning without stating it, that said what needed to be said in the space between the words. But the meaning was there, for anyone willing to read it correctly, for anyone willing to say out loud what the reading of it meant. You had access to the district server when you collected these, Maddox said. Yes. That creates legal exposure for you. I know. She looked at him steadily. I've been sitting with that exposure for 14 months. Your lawyer can address it. That's part of why I'm here. She paused. The other part is those children. She looked at the couch where Ethan and Lily were sleeping. She looked at them for a long moment, and something moved through her face that was not sentiment. Something older and more serious. The expression of a woman who had watched the machinery process children for 9 years and had finally, at the cost of her career and her sense of safety and 14 months of her life, decided that watching was no longer something she was able to do. I have children, she said. I kept telling myself that was why I had to be careful. And then I realized I was using my children as the reason to let other people's children. She stopped. She looked at the bar. I stopped being able to do that. Maddox looked at her for a moment. Then he said, You drove 40 minutes in the dark. You're here. That's what matters now. She nodded once, precise and contained. Aldrich Finch answered on the second ring. Maddox handed the phone to Patricia Greer and listened to her side of the conversation while Reese worked through the file transfer, and Colt, awake now and operating on instinct, put fresh coffee on and brought mugs to people who had not asked for them. Patricia spoke to Aldrich for 11 minutes. When she handed the phone back, Aldrich's voice had a different density than before. The correspondence, Aldrich said. If it holds up, if it is what she's describing, this does not stay in Moley's courtroom. This goes federal, eventually. Today it stays in Moley's courtroom, Maddox said. The name's Maddox. One of them is a sitting state senator. I know who they are. A silence. The filing I submit this morning is going to trigger a response that goes well beyond Dillard and 2 trucks on Route 9. I know that too. Are you ready for that? Maddox looked at the room. Every Reaper present. All of them awake, all of them holding coffee, all of them quiet with the particular quality of men who had processed the situation and reached their conclusion and were finished deliberating. Ghost near the bar, Doc in the kitchen doorway, Colt at the counter, Boone at the window. Corbett Hale in the back, awake now and dressed, sitting with the posture of a man who understood that the morning he had been waiting 2 years for was now less than an hour away. File at 6:30, Maddox said. We'll hold until then. He hung up and turned to the room. Ethan was awake. He sat up on the couch with Lily still asleep against him and looked at the room the way he always looked at rooms, reading the temperature of it before anything else. He took in the changed arrangement. Patricia Greer at the bar. The Reapers all present the particular density of the air that preceded something. Maddox crossed the room and sat on the coffee table in front of him. We're filing the court documents in about 45 minutes, he said. A reporter is publishing a story at the same time. After that, what has been hidden for 11 years is going to be visible. Ethan listened with his hands quiet in his lap. It's going to be loud for a while. There will be attention, law enforcement, lawyers, people who will want to talk to you. He paused. It won't be easy. Nothing's been easy, Ethan said. No, but this kind of not easy is different. This kind moves in the right direction. Ethan was quiet for a moment. He looked at his sleeping sister. He looked at the covered window and the men around the room and the legal pad on the bar. Those other kids, he said, the 17, are they going to find out what happened to them? Maddox held his gaze. That's what the next part is for. What happens this morning opens the door for the next part. But you don't know. Not yet, no. Ethan absorbed this, the way he absorbed hard information without flinching, just taking it in and placing it where it needed to go. Then he nodded. Okay, he said. What do I do right now? Nothing, Maddox said. Let us do the work. Ethan looked at him with eyes that had been doing this work for 2 years and 3 months because no one else was doing it. That's harder than it sounds, he said. Maddox almost smiled. I know it is. Do it anyway. The trucks came back at 6:03. This time they turned into the lot. 2 of them black, heavy-duty, newer than Dillard's vehicle, and they came in without the hesitation of the earlier pass. No scouting deceleration. They knew the address. They had confirmed the target. They were here now to do what they had come to do. 4 men got out of each truck. 8 total. They moved with the particular economy of people who perform this kind of work in a professional capacity and had stopped thinking of it as unusual. Not county officials, not law enforcement operating under any authority that could be named in a filing. Men who existed in the operational layer that Dillard had described. The layer above lawyers and county hearings. Maddox was already at the door when they crossed the lot. The man in front was not Dillard. He was younger, late 30s, with a face that had been rearranged at some point and had healed with a nose slightly off-center and a jawline that carried old structural damage. He moved with the directness of someone who had been given a timeline and a target and had not been given latitude for conversation. He stopped 6 feet from Maddox. He looked at the doorway. He looked at what was in the doorway, which was Maddox, and visible behind him, Ghost and Boone and the rest of the Reapers, in a configuration that communicated with remarkable efficiency that the building and everything in it was accounted for, and that no part of the accounting was going to be renegotiated. We're here for the documentation, the man said. There is no documentation here, Maddox said. It was transmitted 40 minutes ago. The man's expression did not change. Mr. Callahan, you have approximately 20 minutes before this becomes a different kind of morning for everyone in that building. What kind of morning is it for the people who sent you? Maddox said. Because in about 25 minutes, a filing is going to be on record in this district that includes wire transfers and email correspondence connecting 2 men to 11 years of child placement fraud and associated criminal conduct. He paused. Whatever you were sent here to prevent you are already too late for it. The man looked at him, doing the calculation. The specific quality of a professional reassessing his operational parameters when the operational parameters have changed. He looked at the building. He looked at the 8 men behind him. He looked at the Reapers in the doorway. Step aside, he said. No, Maddox said. What happened next was fast and not clean, and would leave marks on several people in ways both visible and not. But it was also in the way that these things sometimes are when the people involved have decided irrevocably what they are willing to give entirely inevitable. The first man moved toward the door. Boone hit him before he cleared the threshold. Not with his fists, with the full deliberate placement of a 6'4" former Navy corpsman between a threat and the thing he was protecting. The collision sent the man sideways into the doorframe hard enough to crack the wood. 2 more came at the doorway, and Ghost and Colt were there. The fight that happened in the entrance of the Steel Reaper clubhouse in the pre-dawn dark of a Montana winter morning was loud and close quarters and ugly in the specific way that real physical confrontations are ugly. No choreography, no clean movements, just the raw, expensive labor of bodies refusing to give ground to other bodies, each side spending something that could not be fully recovered. Maddox took a hit to his left ribs in the first 20 seconds that he registered and set aside. He put the man who hit him on the ground with an efficiency that cost more than it once would have, and moved to the next problem without pausing. His breath was loud in his own ears. The cold was everywhere. Doc had moved the children to the back room before the first man came through the door. He had not been asked. He had simply read the building the way he read all situations and done the thing that needed doing. The way Doc always did the thing that needed doing quietly and without requiring acknowledgement. Corbett Hale was with them. His voice was audible through the wall, low and steady, talking to Lily about the hotel in Billings, about the swimming pool on the fourth floor that looked out over the city lights at night. He built a small, specific island of ordinary in the middle of something that was not ordinary at all, and he maintained it. Inside the back room, Lily was sitting on the cot with her gray blanket around her shoulders and her cards in her hands. She was listening to the sounds from the other room, and her eyes were moving the way they moved when she was calculating whether the world required her to be scared. Ethan was standing at the back room door. He had heard Aldrich's call. He had heard every word of it. He had stood in the hallway and listened to the news that Gerald Fitch had filed a motion at 6:15 to block the court filing, and he had understood immediately what it meant because he had spent 2 years learning exactly how the machinery worked, exactly how it stopped things, exactly what it looked like when the system folded back on itself and swallowed the evidence. He knew this feeling. He had been inside this feeling for 2 years and 3 months, the feeling of the floor giving way. He looked at the phone on the small table beside the door. Reese's phone set down when Reese moved to help at the entrance. Unlocked, screen still lit. Ethan picked it up. He pulled up his left sleeve. The case number was still there. The string of digits in fading blue ink on his inner forearm maintained through all of it, through the blizzard and the fever and the last 30 hours, because it was the only thing he had that no one could take a photo of and confiscate the only piece of information that lived on his body and moved when he moved. He dialed the advocacy hotline number from memory. He had called it 4 months ago from a borrowed phone at the school library. He had called it back 2 months later when the case was still under review. He knew the number the way he knew the case number. The way you know things you have needed to know badly enough for long enough that they stop being information you remember and become part of the architecture of how you think. It rang twice. A woman answered. Night shift, different voice than before, but the same careful, professional warmth of people trained to receive calls like his. He identified himself. He gave the case number. He said he needed to speak to whoever had worked the Whitmore complaint. There was a brief hold. Then a different woman, older. The voice of someone pulled from a back office rather than a frontline desk. She remembered his case. She asked how he was. She asked where he was calling from. He told her he was somewhere safe. He told her what was happening. He told her about the motion to block the court filing, about the documentation about Sarah Vance and the Helena Tribune. And then the woman said something that Ethan had not known and had not expected, and that changed the geometry of the entire morning. She told him that their office had contacted Sarah Vance 8 months ago, that they had provided her with the initial information about the Whitmore placement pattern, that Vance had been working the story since then, but had been unable to proceed to publication without independently verifiable documentary evidence, the kind that could withstand the legal pressure that would come the moment she published names. The documentation Reese had sent was that evidence. But there was a second layer of verification that Vance still needed for the court connection, the Marsh connection, the federal dimension. The kind of independent corroboration that could not come from documents alone. It had to come from a source who had direct operational knowledge of the advocacy office's original investigation. That source was sitting on the phone with Ethan right now. The woman was willing to speak to Vance directly. She had been willing for 8 months. She had been waiting for someone to close the loop between what she knew and what Vance could print. Ethan said, "Can you call her right now?" The woman said yes. He gave her Sarah Vance's number from memory. He had seen it on Reese's phone screen during the call the previous afternoon, and it had gone into the same place where the other necessary things lived. He hung up. He stood in the back room doorway with Reese's phone in his hand and the sounds of the fight coming from the front of the building, and Lily looking at him from the cot with her cards in her hands and her careful eyes. He had not known what he was doing when he dialed. He had not known about the connection to Vance. He had called because it was the only number he had left, the only thing still available to him in the moment when every other option was being taken away, And he had made the call for the same reason he had walked through the blizzard and knocked on an impossible door. Because when everything else is closed, you go to the one thing still open and you push. 2 minutes and 40 seconds later, two Harlan Creek Sheriff's Patrol cars turned into the lot with their lights going, and the deputy from the night before stepped out of the first car with the wide, careful stance of a man arriving at a scene worse than dispatch described. The 8 men from the truck stopped. The fight stopped. Maddox was breathing hard. There was blood on his right hand from a cut across his knuckles, and his left ribs were sending a continuous message that he was deferring until there was time to receive it. Boone had a gash above his eyebrow. Ghost's left hand was wrong in a way that suggested 2 to 3 weeks of favoring it. Colt had a split at his lower lip that matched Ethan's exactly and would have been darkly funny in a different moment. The older deputy looked at the lot. He looked at the 8 men. He looked at Maddox. "Called it in an hour ago," the deputy said. "Suspicious vehicles on Route 9. He looked at Maddox with an expression that was not entirely official and had not been entirely official since the previous night, when a 12-year-old boy had arranged himself with the practiced posture of someone accustomed to institutional scrutiny and had said that nobody had forced him to do anything since last night and that this was new. "Seemed like something worth watching." "Appreciate it," Maddox said. The men from the trucks gave names that were real, but attached to nothing that would hold them for long. The names of men who worked through layers of insulation, sent here by people who were already in offices and homes elsewhere in Montana, learning in those same minutes that the morning had not gone according to plan. At 6:31, Maddox's phone buzzed with a text from Aldrich Finch. 2 words: filed, confirmed. 60 seconds later, Reese held up his laptop from the kitchen doorway, screen facing out. The Helena Tribune website, Sarah Vance's byline at the top, the headline visible from across the room. The story was live. Maddox did not need to read beyond the first paragraph to understand that something had crossed a threshold that could not be uncrossed. That the architecture of 11 years, the contracts and the overrides, and the dissolved foundation, and the rotating caseworkers, and the plaques and the Friday nights, and the 17 children with no traceable outcome was now visible in the kind of light that did not go back out once it was on. He read the 2 names at the top of the article. He set his phone down on the bar. Outside it was beginning to get light. Not sunrise yet, but the sky at the eastern tree line had gone from black to deep gray to the particular blue that preceded actual dawn, and the stars were going out one by one, and the snow on the ground had taken on the faint luminescence that snow gets when the dark begins to lift. The neon sign above the door was still buzzing, red and amber, still going. Lily appeared in the hallway. She was wearing the Steel Reaper t-shirt that came to her knees and the gray blanket around her shoulders, and her hair was the disaster of a child who had slept hard and cared nothing about it. She was looking at the room with her careful eyes running the scan, locating her brother, and then she looked at Maddox. She crossed the room without hesitation. No calculation, no pause. Just a small child walking toward an adult who was hurt with the directness of someone who had decided the assessment was complete and the conclusion was safe. She stopped in front of him. She looked at the cut on his right hand. She looked up at his face with an expression of pure, unfiltered concern. "Does it hurt?" she said. Maddox looked down at her. "A little." She reached out with 2 fingers and touched the back of his left hand. Not the injured one, the other one. The touch of a child who had learned early that people's real injuries were not always located where the visible damage was. "Okay," she said, and then she went to find Colt. Maddox stood very still for a moment after she walked away. Across the room, Ghost had his coffee in his window. Route 9 was quiet and dark beyond the glass. Maddox had long ago learned to read the set of Ghost's shoulders, the difference between the tension that never fully left and the rarer thing that came when a man had done right and knew it. Ghost had that now. It lived in the way he was standing, the way he was looking at the road, the way he had stopped calculating and was simply present. He said nothing. Neither did Maddox. It did not need to be said. Judge Moley issued the temporary emergency protective placement order at 8:47 in the morning. Aldrich called from the courthouse parking lot. His voice had the quality of a man who had been awake for 24 hours and had won something and was still too tired to feel the full weight of the winning, but could feel the edges of it beginning to arrive. Temporary, he said. 2 weeks pending full hearing, but it means no one removes those children from an approved placement without a court order. Nobody. Not DCS, not the county, nobody. And the approved placement, a pause. That's what I need to discuss with you. DCS cannot be the placement authority given the documented conflicts of interest, which means we need either an emergency foster certification or a guardian assignment. Another pause. The fastest pathway given the circumstances and the existing relationship and the children's own express preference. What did they say? Ethan spoke to my paralegal this morning while you were outside. He said he wanted to stay at the clubhouse. He used the word safe. He said it was the only place he had felt safe in 2 years. Maddox looked at the bar, at the legal pad with its web of names, at the broken compass on his forearm, the needle pointing nowhere, pointing to no fixed north, and for the first time in 8 years, he thought that maybe that was not entirely the wrong way to be. What does the certification process look like? Long normally, but there are expedited pathways for documented emergency situations, and this qualifies under 3 separate criteria. I can start the paperwork today. A pause. Boone Clearwater has a clean record and a residential address. He would be listed as primary. You would be secondary. Boone doesn't know that yet. I'm telling you first. Maddox set the phone on the bar and walked down the hall to where Boone was sitting on a cot with an ice pack held to the gash above his eyebrow and a cup of coffee going cold in his other hand. Maddox told him. Boone was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the ice pack. He looked at the wall. He was thinking about something that he kept in the compressed space where men like him kept the things that mattered most. 14 years of Navy service, the things he had seen, the specific education of a man who had spent most of his adult life in extreme proximity to other people's worst moments and had learned in the process both what it cost to care and what it cost not to. Paperwork's long, Boone said finally. Aldrich says expedited. He thinks 2 weeks. Boone turned the ice pack over. He looked at his coffee. You're asking me because I have the residential address. I'm asking you because Lily already trusts you and she doesn't trust easily. Boone looked at him, the full look of a man deciding whether the thing being offered is real. He had the wound in him somewhere that came from believing things were real when they weren't. Most of the Reapers did in configurations shaped by the particular ways their lives had taught them that what looked like solid ground sometimes wasn't. All right, he said. All right. Stop looking at me like that, Boone said, not without warmth. Maddox went back to the phone. 2 federal agents arrived at Aldrich Finch's office at 1 in the afternoon with business cards and the expression of people who had been reading documentation for several hours and had arrived at questions that required more than documentation to answer. Aldrich called from the parking lot afterward. They're serious, he said. Multi-county, possibly multi-state given the Sentinel, Wyoming connection. A pause. They want to speak to Corbett today if possible. Maddox told Corbett. Corbett sat with it for a moment, the weight of it, the scope. Then he said with the flat, precise clarity of a 20-year-old who had organized his entire existence around the project of being believed by someone in a position to act on it, tell them I'll talk as long as they need. Patricia Greer spent 3 hours with Aldrich going through the hard drive documentation. At 3 in the afternoon, she sat in the main room with a cup of coffee and the expression of a woman who had set down something very heavy and was still feeling the phantom weight of it. Ethan sat across from her. They did not speak for the first few minutes. The silence between them had the quality of 2 people who had survived adjacently from different positions in different distances and recognized it without needing to announce it. Colt had made real food actual meals rather than toast and soup, and they were both eating. You were there when it started, Ethan said finally. Patricia Greer looked at him. Why didn't you stop it sooner? The question was not accusatory. It was the question of a 12-year-old who had spent 2 years trying to understand why the systems designed to help him had instead processed him, and who was now sitting across from someone who had been inside one of those systems and might have an actual answer. Patricia Greer looked at him for a long moment. She looked at the table. She looked back up. Because I told myself I needed to be sure, she said. And when I was sure, I told myself I needed more documentation. And when I had more documentation, I told myself I needed to protect my family first. She paused. Every reason felt real when I was inside it. None of them were wrong exactly. Ethan held her gaze. He was processing the acknowledgement, the plain statement of a thing without the machinery of excuse wrapped around it. He had not received many plain statements in 2 years and 3 months. Okay, he said. She looked at him. That's all. I'm tired of being angry, Ethan said. The flatness had left his voice replaced by something that was its own specific exhaustion, not defeat. The weariness of a child who has been running for so long that when the running finally stops, the anger he used as fuel has nowhere left to go and becomes something quieter and more complicated. I don't have enough left to stay mad at everyone who should have done something sooner. He looked at his coffee mug. I just want things to be different from now on. Patricia Greer looked at the boy across the table and did not trust herself to speak for a moment. When she did, her voice was even. Things are going to be different from now on, she said. That part I can promise you. The hearing was 3 weeks later. The county courtroom in Harlan Creek was full in a way that county courtrooms in small Montana towns are rarely full. Reporters in the gallery, community members who had driven in from 2 counties over, lawyers present on behalf of parties not yet formally named in the current proceedings, but who understood that the current proceedings were the visible surface of something larger and were positioning accordingly. 6 folding chairs had been added along the back wall to handle the overflow. In the chairs behind the petitioner's table sat 8 members of the Steel Reapers Motorcycle Club. Leather cuts, boots on the courthouse floor, hands quiet in their laps. The particular stillness of men who had decided that their presence in this room was a statement and were making it without moving, without performing, without needing the room to acknowledge what they were doing. Aldrich Finch stood at the petitioner's table and built the case in the methodical, relentless way that good lawyers build structures. One verified fact placed on top of another until the architecture rose to a height that required a response. He presented Corbett Hale's testimony, which Corbett delivered from the witness stand in the flat, precise, unbreakable way he had delivered it in the clubhouse 3 weeks before. He did not look away from Aldrich's face while he spoke. His voice did not break. He presented Patricia Greer's documentation, which she walked through with the focused clarity of a woman who had been waiting 14 months to say it in a room where it would be written into a record that could not be altered or pending reviewed into irrelevance. He presented the financial documentation in the correspondence, in the Sentinel history, in the Wyoming connection, in the 11-year timeline of overrides and inspections and plaques, in dissolved foundations, and a duty supervisor who had processed an emergency placement order in 90 minutes in the middle of a blizzard. The county attorney's office made 2 objections in the first hour. Both were overruled. After the second overruling, they stopped making objections. Maddox sat in the gallery with his people and watched. He watched Aldrich work. He watched the judge's face, which was the face of a man absorbing a reality that he had perhaps understood was theoretically possible, but was now confronting in the specific in the form of 11 years of documented evidence and 2 human beings sitting in the front row of his courtroom. He watched Ethan. The boy sat at the petitioner's table beside Aldrich Finch. He had asked to be there. Not to testify, not that day, but to be present and visible in the room where his case was being decided. Maddox had offered a brief argument against it and then had not argued further because Ethan's expression when he asked had been the expression of a person exercising the first real agency they had been permitted in a long time, and that was not something Maddox was willing to take from him. Ethan sat with his back straight and his hands on the table, and his chin level, and he watched the proceedings with the focused attention of a student who has been waiting a very long time to take the exam that will tell him whether the studying mattered. His face was still. His face was always still. But when Aldrich presented the initial complaint record from 9 years prior with the handwritten notation in the margin that read, "Prior complaint record non-substantive county override per director," Caswell Ethan's hands pressed flat against the table surface. Just the hands. A small downward pressure barely visible from the gallery. The quiet physical expression of something that had no other available outlet in that room at that moment. Maddox saw it. He did not look away. At 1:15 in the afternoon, Judge Moley issued the permanent protective placement order. He issued it in the measured language of judicial documents, and beneath the careful language was the architecture that Aldrich had built piece by piece across the morning. The documented pattern, the verified misconduct, the corroborated testimony of a young man who had waited 2 years for someone to be willing to receive it. A law enforcement referral for criminal investigation was simultaneously forwarded to the state attorney general's office, and through a mechanism Aldrich had prepared for the federal jurisdiction, given the multi-county and multi-state scope of the Sentinel connection. Dale and Sandra Whitmore were taken into custody at 2 in the afternoon at their residence on the east side of Harlan Creek. Director Prine resigned his position before 4 o'clock. Stacy Pruitt was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Gerald Fitch, county attorney, announced at 5 that he would not seek re-election. The state senator issued a full denial, retained 4 lawyers, and flew to Washington. The other name on Patricia Greer's list, the man who ran the private equity fund with a charitable footprint across 3 Montana counties, said nothing publicly for 6 days. On the 7th day, a sealed federal complaint appeared in the Billings District Court under a judge who was not David Marsh. The 17 children with no traceable outcome were not found that day or the week after. The investigation that began with Aldrich's filing and Patricia Greer's hard drive would take 9 months and cross 4 states. At the end of it, 14 of the 17 had been located. 3 remained unaccounted for. The weight of those 3 settled into a specific place in Maddox Callahan's chest that he did not speak about and did not display, and had decided without ceremony and without being asked to carry for the rest of his life. But that was later. On the evening of the hearing, the Sunrise Diner on Route 9 was open until 10, the way it always was, warm light spilling yellow through the plate glass windows onto the snowpack parking lot. The night shift waitress refilled coffee without being asked and brought extra napkins, and did not comment on the number of large men in leather jackets who had taken up half the restaurant, or on the 2 children sitting in the middle of them, or on the particular quality of noise that filled the booth, where Lily Pruitt was apparently in the process of winning a card game by inventing the rules as she went. Lily laid down 3 cards with the decisive authority of a 6-year-old who knows exactly what she is doing. "That's not a real hand," Colt said. "It's a butterfly hand," Lily said. "Butterflies don't beat anything. There's no butterfly hand in any version of Boone," Lily said without looking away from Colt. "Is a butterfly hand real?" Boone, sitting on her other side with an ice cream he had ordered for reasons he was not examining, said without inflection, "Absolutely real." "I'm surrounded," Colt said to the table at large. Reese was laughing. His real laugh, the one that was startled out of him rather than produced for social purposes, the laugh that made him look younger than 26, and that the other Reapers privately considered one of the better sounds in a room. Doc was eating his meal with the steady equanimity of a man who had learned a long time ago to receive good things without catastrophizing them, without waiting for the other shoe, without building contingency plans for the withdrawal of whatever had been given. Just eating. Just present. Corbett Hale was at the far end of the table with a piece of pie. He was eating it slowly. Not the careful fast eating of someone who expects interruption, not the vigilant monitoring of someone who has learned that food can disappear. Just slowly. The way a person eats when they are relearning that a meal placed in front of them will still be there if they take their time with it. He was watching the table. The way a person watches something they have been outside of for a long time and are tentatively, cautiously beginning to believe they might be allowed inside. Ethan sat beside Maddox. He was eating with a pace that had eased over the past 3 weeks from what it had been that first night. Not gone entirely the old reflex of finishing quickly, but looser now. Less urgent. More like the memory of urgency than the urgency itself. The body slowly updating its understanding of what the present required. After a while, he said without preamble, "What happens to us now?" Maddox set down his coffee. "What do you mean? After the legal stuff?" Ethan looked at the table. Foster placement, different home, different school. He said it with the flat taxonomy of a child who had been through the taxonomy before and knew its stages. We cycle through the system again. Not the same system, Maddox said. A system. Maddox looked at him. He thought about what to say, and then he decided, as he usually decided with Ethan on the plain thing. Boone filed emergency foster certification 3 weeks ago. Aldrich expedited it. It came through yesterday. He paused. You'd be placed with him officially. You'd stay at the clubhouse while we figure out something more permanent. Another pause. If that's what you want. Ethan was very still. That's an option, he said. It's what's already in motion. I'm asking if it's what you want. Ethan looked at the table for a long moment. He looked at Boone, who was pretending to be very focused on the question of whether butterfly hands were canonically valid across all card games or only specific variants. He looked at Colt's forearms resting on the table, the wave on his wrist, dark blue the Pacific Ocean, that a young man had put on his skin near the water and carried inland with him through all the years between then and here. He looked at Doc across the table with his measured calm. He looked at Ghost at the far end of the booth. Not at the window this time. Present at the table, coffee in hand, listening to the argument about butterfly hands, with the expression of a man who has done the right thing at real cost and has arrived somewhere on the other side of it that feels, if not entirely like peace, then like its close and honest neighbor. He looked at Lily. She had won the card game by fiat and was now demanding a rematch with the imperious confidence of a 6-year-old who has found her footing and intends to use it without apology. Her voice was bright and certain in the diner light. Her laugh when it came was sudden and real and entirely completely hers, unguarded. Unmanaged, the laugh of a child who had been given enough safety in the past 3 weeks to forget briefly and increasingly that she had ever needed to manage herself. Ethan watched his sister laugh. Maddox watched Ethan watch her. "Yeah," Ethan said. His voice was quiet. "That's what I want." He picked up his fork. He went back to his food. His shoulders had dropped by some small fraction of an inch, barely measurable, a nearly invisible change. The particular relaxation of a body that has been braced for a very long time and has finally cautiously, tentatively begun to believe that the bracing might not be necessary anymore, that the floor might hold, that the door that was still lit when everything else went dark might stay lit for a while. 3 months later in the spring, when the snow had pulled back to the north-facing slopes and the grass along Route 9 had come up green, and the days were long enough to still carry light at 7 in the evening, the Steel Reapers established the Haven Project. There was no ceremony. Aldrich filed the nonprofit paperwork on a Thursday, and it was approved the following Tuesday, and the first board meeting was in the back room of the clubhouse, with 6 people and a pot of coffee and a legal pad that was not Maddox's old one, but looked enough like it that he noticed. The Haven Project's mission was direct: emergency support, legal advocacy, and community resources for children and families failed by standard institutional channels, connecting them with networks of people willing to act when systems would not. Ghost ran the legal coordination. The geometry of his mind, the way he traced lines of responsibility and identified which pressure point would yield and which would only push back harder, translated without friction into the work of knowing which official to call and which document to file and which room to put the right people in together. Doc ran the medical intake, the preliminary assessments, the quiet conversations with children who needed someone who could absorb whatever they said without changing expression. Colt cooked. This was not a metaphor. He cooked for every intake, every family that came through, because he understood something that could not be articulated in a mission statement. That the first thing a person needs when the world has failed them is not a legal brief. It is warmth. It is food that someone made with their hands and set in front of you without conditions. Reese built the documentation systems, the intake records and case tracking, and secure communication channels that kept the work from being disrupted the way the Whitmore Network had disrupted things for 11 years. Boone answered the phone. This was in practical terms the most important job. He answered it at 2 in the morning and at 6 in the morning and during meals and during rides. He answered it with the same voice every time, unhurried and steady, containing everything that voice had learned to contain across 14 years of service and the years after. People who called in the worst hours of their worst nights heard that voice and understood that the other end of the line was held by someone who was not going to be moved. Maddox ran the club. He still rode. He still sat at the bar with coffee going cold and the legal pad nearby. He still had the broken compass on his forearm, and sometimes in the worst hours of the worst nights, looked at it and thought about what it meant to move without the instrument, to choose direction from somewhere other than a fixed point. He had not resolved that question. He had decided that resolving it was not the point. The compass was broken. You moved anyway. You found the direction not from the needle, but from the decision. 8 years he had worn it as a reminder of what he had lost. Now some nights it felt like something else. On an evening in December, the first full year after the snowstorm, Maddox was sitting on the front step of the clubhouse. The cold had come back, not a blizzard, just the steady, honest Montana cold temperature in the teens, the sky clear and hard and full of stars, the way it got at altitude when the air was clean and the clouds had moved on. The Harley engines in the lot were warm from an afternoon ride, cooling now in the dark metal, contracting with soft clicks. The neon sign buzzed above him, red and amber, still going. He heard the door behind him open and Ethan sat down beside him. 13, now 3 inches taller than he had been the previous November. Still watchful, still careful, but the watchfulness had changed character over the months. Less the tactical scan of a child monitoring for threats. More the observant attention of a person who had learned that watching carefully was not always about danger. That sometimes the world was worth looking at simply because it was there, and because looking was something you could do freely when you were no longer spending all of it on survival. They sat in silence for a while. It was something they had developed the habit of over the months without planning to. The comfortable quiet of two people who had learned each other's silences and stopped needing to fill them. From inside, Lily's voice was audible, demanding that Colt arbitrate some dispute with the seriousness of a head of state presenting a treaty matter. Colt's response was the long-suffering voice of a man who had agreed to serve as impartial witness in a card game and was discovering the full implications of that commitment. Ghost's dry laugh, the sound of boots on the wood floor. Then Boone's voice, the steady, low rumble of it, making some pronouncement that drew a cheer from Lily and a groan from Colt, and then everyone laughing. The sound of people who had found each other. Ethan was looking at the sky. Doc said the investigation found 2 more of them, he said. The 17. Yeah, this morning. 14 now. 14 now. Ethan was quiet for a moment. 3 still. 3 still. He looked at the stars for a while. Then he looked at the parking lot, at the bikes in their rows, at the snow along the fence line, catching the amber light from the sign. He pulled his jacket tighter. A real jacket, the right size, the right weight for a Montana. December, the kind of jacket a kid was supposed to have. He had not made note of it when Boone brought it home 3 months ago. He had just put it on. But Maddox had noticed. The not noticing of it was its own thing. Are you going to stop looking? Ethan said. Maddox looked at the compass on his forearm. The broken needle. The direction it could not give. 8 years ago, he had gotten it because the needle being broken felt like the truest thing about him. A man without a fixed north. A man who had lost the thing that told him which way was right. He thought about a boy walking 6 miles through a blizzard with his sister in his arms, going to the one door still lit. He thought about what it had cost to look for help for a year and find nothing, and what it cost afterward to be the person who decided to look back. The needle had never pointed anywhere, and yet here they were. "No," he said. Ethan nodded slowly. He looked at the stars for another moment. "Me neither," he said. They sat there in the cold for a while longer. The man and the boy, while behind them the building was warm and loud with the sounds of people who had found each other in the particular way that people do when the systems that were supposed to hold them have failed, and they have decided stubbornly and without ceremony to hold each other instead. The neon sign buzzed above the door, red and amber, still going.